Hello, my name's Amy and I'm joined today by James Campbell, CEO and co-founder of Nimbus, who will be talking us through the obstacles faced by enterprises as they go about adopting AI. James, what is decision latency and why is it quietly killing enterprises?
Well, decision latency is the gap between information entering either into the organization or across different departments or teams and execution against that intelligence. And that decision latency is really what is defining the gap between businesses moving forward and the speed at which the market's moving. Today, the markets are moving at an accelerated rate. AI is enhancing the ability of markets to select new trends, new directions, and businesses are getting further and further behind that. And that's what that latency is. And why is it killing businesses? Well, if you can't react to the speed at which the market's moving, then you can't deliver your product, your service at the speed at which the market is currently needing it. And businesses are really data rich. They're 80% of data in an organization isn't used. And there's huge pools of data, but the faster the market's moving, the less time they have to actually look at that data. So it's actually, the gap is growing even if they're trying to work harder to be able to close it. And it is ultimately meaning that more money is being spent, but the solution isn't really allowing them to still accelerate to the speed at which the market's asking.
And let's pull back a bit before we delve deep into this. Let's explore the context. Where are companies feeling at the moment? What are the obstacles or concerns, or what might be frightening them from adopting AI?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bottlenecks there. You've got a few things. You've got the fear element. There's, what is AI going to do with my information? Is it going to expose my information to some of the public domains, which have been, that has happened? And there's guardrails that are being put in place with some of the large organizations, but those guardrails don't exist for everyone. So there's, what's going to happen with my information? Will this put me at risk in terms of kind of the business moving in a certain direction that we can't control? So we can't actually understand exactly how AI is being used within the business. And if we can't understand how, then that level of chaos delivers a level of risk. So there's that fear element at the moment. Then there's the skepticism. There's been countless AI tools that have come across, whether that's executives within organizations or teams within organizations, that have failed to deliver against their promise. And if it's one, it's 1,000. So we've got people that are scared of what it can do and then going, well, hold on a minute, is this really going to do what you're saying it's going to do? And we've been burnt 5 times already this year. Is this just another one of those? So I think those are the real key blockers at the moment. And then there's the actual output of any of these tools so far within organizations that is in some occasions causing what's called the AI tax, which is where those tools are actually costing more in terms of time and resource to be able to control them or get decent output from them than the process that without them used to take.
And that's really a false economy.
Exactly. So with those three kind of combining, you've got people going, yes, I understand that I must deploy something like this into my organization because the market can do it very easily that we need to serve. They're moving away at a rate of knots, like I said, with this decision latency. But we can't do it in a way that we can control, govern, and rely on. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge for any of these organizations right now.
You've mentioned companies moving at a rate of knots, and speed is important for companies to be performing and delivering at an appropriate pace. But what about accuracy?
So that is one of the other massive problems for larger scale AI deployment, and certainly where AI is being used to derive decisions that are worth a lot of money. If you can't rely on the output, then you can't really use it. And so the data being there, the data being delivered in a really fast way, if you can't rely on that data, then it isn't going to be usable in your business. Now, reliability, yes, people are very aware that AI, the large language models, LLMs, they hallucinate. That's a gap in their context, a gap in their training that is where they're then having to infer an answer. They're having to guess, and they're incentivized to do so. Those hallucinations bias depending on where you ask the question or which model you ask the question of. Those elements are adding a level of invalidity to the answer. And moving past that requires certain tools, certain governance of the AI usage in an organization to then move to a point that you can say, right, whatever's coming out from these solutions, these tools, is accurate. I can use that as fact. Otherwise, it's very much more an educated opinion. And moving to that area is what a lot of these tools are trying to do, but it does require a holistic approach.
James, what on earth is a knowledge graph, and why should any C-suite executive even care?
So a knowledge graph, in its most basic term, is a digital twin of the business. It's a map of your information and how that relates, for each data point, how that relates to each other. These are not actually new things. They have existed in organizations for years in one form or another. Originally, it was just folder architecture, making sure that your data can be stored in a certain format, can be recorded and found in a certain way. Moving towards something, a digital knowledge graph, is where then your information gets captured in a structured format. And that can be split into two things: the context graph, which is actually the list of information, and the causal graph, which is how they relate. Does this piece of information impact other pieces of information? Now, what that is you as an executive, that's your lay of the land of the business. That is, I can look in one place and I know all the information about my business. Now, if you were to go and ask any C-suite leader in any organization, mid to large to enterprise, right now, if they could do that, the answer is no. It will be in hundreds of different systems, in hundreds of different formats, and it will either be complete, or it will have gaps, or it will be old, out of date. The quality level is low. In a platform like Nimbus, what you are enabling is the ability to audit that knowledge graph. So you've got agents specifically designed to go through that graph, identify where there are context gaps, where there are inconsistencies, duplicates, and it's going to build that quality level up. Now, that in itself is important for a business. It allows then people to understand where the data is. Is the data aligned? Are we all working to the same data? But then what it introduces is traceability and auditability of that data. It's all in one place, and you can very easily interrogate it. This is something that is going to enhance your ability to align your teams, but also from an external audit perspective, will make that process very much quicker, which we all know makes it a lot cheaper. So it's a very important thing for businesses to grasp. And that's just from a data perspective. It's going to ultimately fuel your ability to understand your area in your context in the business. From an agentic perspective, it becomes very critical to how those agents are able to execute against what they're being told to do. They need the context. But for agents to speak to each other and have multiple agents, which will then facilitate an enhanced level of intelligence for a business, they need to understand each other's context. Well, they can't do that without a centralized understanding, centralized graph. But then there's the other limitation of memory in each agent. To avoid them becoming extremely expensive and therefore cost prohibitive, they need to have memory limitations on how they can operate. Well, a knowledge graph for a large organization is very vast. You can imagine the amount of data that goes into that. So what you need to have in place, and this is something that we've developed within Nimbus, is the ability for an agent to extract the right part of that context so that it knows, okay, this bit is really relevant to what I'm trying to do, and it's relevant to those other parts of the platform that I'm looking to speak to. And it can then fit within the boundaries of its memory limitation, but still operate really accurately and really effectively.
So would it be able to spot trends and patterns as well?
Absolutely. And that's something, digitizing and collating all of that information to one place will unlock so much knowledge about the data you already have in your organization that you couldn't possibly have extracted in any other way. It will allow you to then see, okay, well, this information relates to this, and actually that could change this process. It could actually then inform you about, well, something you've done historically as a set of processes. It could be just one. Or say, actually, there's huge inefficiencies in these particular areas of the business. How about we look at a different way of approaching those? So it's not just patterns in the data, which it will extract, but it's patterns in your operation as well that it will then enable you to really accelerate in a really efficient and lean way.
So from operations all the way to sales and marketing and looking at your pipeline, this is providing data of enormous value.
Absolutely. And to speak to that, subdepartmentally, you wouldn't have a singular knowledge graph. You would have multiple graphs that relate to each individual team, department, whatever that looks like. A sales graph, a marketing graph, a finance graph. Now you can have a top level graph. In Nimbus, we actually collate them. So there's families of graphs and a parent graph. That allows you then to control not only permissions exposure. So you don't want everyone in the business having access to every piece of information. You want there to be still some governance on what data people can access. But it also allows you to then chunk that up so that the management, the cleansing, the understanding of that information is much, much simpler, much, much quicker. But then you can still knit that together at the top. So you know that if something changes in the sales graph, that it will impact the finance graph, it will impact the supply chain graph or the marketing graph, so that everyone still, without even having to think about it, knows what the rest of the business is doing.
Which in an age where people are working remotely, hybrid, you might have a UK sovereignty company and you've got staff members all across the world, everyone working under the same hat is going to be of enormous value.
Absolutely. And it's the singular way to completely align your organization. It will bring everyone under the same understanding at the same time, and then aligning, making sure that people are moving forward at exactly the way you want them to move forward, which is critical to businesses being able to accelerate their decision velocity.
Let's swing back. Talk to us about how the information about the outside world affects and can be put to use within the business.
So yeah, the linking of the information, both internally and externally, is done through the causal graph. And that's different to the context graph, which is this list of information. The causal graph is the relationships. That's how does one piece of information link to another. Now that is critical to not only understanding how to then take pieces of information and inform them back into the graph, but also to see how the information ripples through the business. It's the butterfly effect of information through the organization. If marketing make a change to their content or their campaign, how is that going to impact ultimately the forecast or the sales? If the causal graph can model that, which is a challenge, and it's something that is ultimately the biggest blocker to enterprise true engagement or true autonomy. If you can model that, then ultimately you can have something in complete sentience. So the organization can actually operate in the absence of human intervention, and the humans then just become the looking through the lens in what's happening and giving certain direction. And that's ultimately the vision of what we're trying to achieve, is this organizational sentience where the business moves from being led by certain small parts of AI initiatives to being wholly led by AI and a living, breathing organism that then allows it to move at the same speed as the market. I would say that an aspiration of what we're trying to deliver is a one-to-one relationship with the speed at which the market's moving and the speed at which a business can execute. That's like the golden goose. If you can do that, then a business can actually react to exactly what the market wants. And, that's going to set that business apart against anyone. That's an absolute competition killer at that point.
Game changer.
And this is what Nimbus is looking to drive towards.
I mean, ultimately, facts are only as valuable as how you use them, the context of it and then the value and what you do with it. Could you speak a little bit more about the importance of understanding a fact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really good point. Like fact is something that's quite fluid at the moment.
It's being questioned constantly, isn't it?
You depending on your knowledge of the situation, the knowledge of what's going on, you can interpret a lot of what's coming out of AI as fact. And then in a different lens, you could actually look at it and say, well, actually, a lot of that isn't fact. It's very well-constructed opinion. So understanding fact is a crucial part of true AI adoption. It's going to de-risk the use of it entirely. There are different mechanisms to do that, and What we're looking to deploy is a mechanism that allows you to then interrogate that information from start to finish. And that's what we call decision tracing. You can, we within the engine that we have that speaks to the large language models, we have certain different filtering mechanisms to try and extract some of the hallucinations, some of the bias. And we do that through speaking to multiple models and running RAG analysis. There's a number of different mechanisms that we use. But ultimately, what you still need to introduce is the ability for a human to still ratify that. And so that's where decision tracing comes in. And where this is really important, this is mapping every single point from the output through the decision making right back to the original source. And that's crucial for confidence. That will give people a complete understanding of exactly why they've arrived at that decision, which is great for reporting and knowing that you're moving in the right direction, but it's also very good from an audit and a traceability perspective. But what that is also removing is this black box problem of AI. At the moment, if you have an employee that puts some information into ChatGPT, comes up with an answer and then uses that in their report or what they're doing to move forward, they have no idea what happened in the middle. They certainly can't explain that back to you. And that's a real problem, because that is actually a complete unknown entity within organizations right now. There's this huge amount of information that's being spat out that no one really knows how they got there. And that's where we need to move away from and move towards this position where actually every single output that's being used in the organization has this tracing point back.
And would you say for companies wanting to future-proof the growth of their business, being able to empower their workforce to interrogate that data, not be stabbing in the dark, is that an important decision?
I'd say that's like one of the most critical decisions right now, being that we've entered into this kind of AI deployment phase. Is there a tool out there that does that well? I would say arguably not. And when I say that, I mean, to empower them to do it, they need to be able to see it, interrogate it themselves.
Understand it.
You can have all the best tools in the world, but unless you can actually see the information, see the data, understand the data, and then be able to go back through that data in all of the different forms that data could arrive to that person, then you need to be able to have that in a way that is adapting to how they need to see it. Now, that's something that is missing. It's something that is an emerging technology space. It's called computational UI. It's the user interface of whatever they're interacting with that is adapting to whatever is coming in. Either that's the data or the person using it. That mechanism is something that we've built into our decision studio. Our decision studio will not look the same to any individual employee, and it will also look different every time they look at something different, to different data, and it's adapting to whatever's coming in and how they're using it. And that is critical, because if you're going to use all these different tools in all of these different ways, which you need to do if you're going to do it holistically, it needs to be adapting in that way so that it's always relevant. Otherwise, you're going to have to keep building and building and building. You spend most of your time building the way in which you want to see the data as opposed to actually actioning it.
So, James, will boards eventually expect real-time strategic simulation as standard governance?
I mean, yeah, I think that's the way that businesses are going. And I think it's something that in my past I've seen in automotive, in consumer brands. There's a lot of simulation replacing physical, whether that's in simulating physical product testing or simulating marketing outcomes. There's a lot of simulation happening, but it's simulation as a whole that I think is where it will move. It's not just, okay, what does this product do under these conditions, or what does this marketing campaign do against these markets? It's, if it does that, how does that then impact finance? How does that then impact sales? How does that impact then how we need to move the product forward? What do the features look like? It's this holistic simulation that ultimately I think boards will be expecting, because they'll want to be able to stress test the boundaries. They'll want to say, okay, fine, but we're now going to ask for this change in the organization. What's that going to do to EBITDA? What's that going to do to our organizational structure? Do we need less team or more team? And I think that is going to be critical to, again, this decision velocity, the ability to move really, really, really fast, needs that holistic simulation. And that is where I think a lot of these tools, the infrastructure tools that are leveraging multiple different AI instances need to move. It needs to be about bringing all of this together and allowing you to real like battle strategy against your organization.
I mean, the pros of strategic simulation are quite apparent, really. You know, it's safer, it's going to be cheaper, arguably. Talk us a bit about why somebody might not want to do that. Why might they not want to put their data out there?
It's risk. It's like, you know, will this be exposed? Will we get something? You know, will we be opening ourselves up to either attack or misinformation on that? And then it's okay, but how do I know that that's exactly what's going to happen? The more you simulate, the more risk you do ultimately introduce in terms of like it being wrong. Mm-hmm. Because all of those validation points of physical intervention, whether that's a physical test or a physical A/B test of something, they are validation points that it's you know where you are. So simulation is something that we need to encourage and nurture and develop through a governed process. And I think that's the governance piece is really important. It's about making sure that information for businesses remains as a walled garden. It needs to remain internal. I mean, with Nimbus, it's a dedicated Google Cloud node. It's in their own territory. It's their sovereign data. It doesn't go anywhere. And that's critical. We don't want to be releasing that data even over a border, let alone into another territory. But ultimately as well, it's about how do you then control, if you're going to be prompting out to the models to enrich information back into your organization, how do you control what is exposed to those prompts that doesn't then expose your data to the models to then be trained against that then could become public domain? One area that can actually suffice certain businesses with certain security requirements would be an on-premises deployment of, say, Nimbus or some of these solutions where they're actually, it's not going anywhere. It sits in a server on their premises and it is containing their data physically on premise. And that will mean that businesses can still facilitate the same level of holistic organization-wide simulation without their data even leaving the building. And that's going to be critical to certain organizations for sure.
Absolutely. If you look at the global landscape at the moment, having UK sovereignty alone is a huge advantage, let alone being able to have it on-prem. So James, again, we're going to pull back a bit. What are companies right now fundamentally misunderstanding about AI?
I think it's the fact that like AI deployment is just sticking some AI tools into your business and facilitating each employee having access to AI. That is not AI deployment. That is effectively digitizing your employees, but then not putting any managers in place.
It's going, here you go, here's ChatGPT or whatever, have a go.
Absolutely. And they're all running in 1,000 different directions. You've no idea where they're running. And I can understand why there have been some instances where businesses have gone, whoa, hold on, we're going to stop. We need a complete AI overhaul here because this is a mess. It's 1,000 mile an hour chaos. And I think the understanding that AI deployment comes from the form of like either Copilot in your business, which really is not tunable to the way that you ultimately need to operate, or it's I've got an AI note taker and something doing my AI finance and this, that actually you've still got people having to physically pick up the information, put it somewhere else. Have they done that correctly? Is it the same context? Have the same people pick the same information up? The answer is most likely no. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding, is that is not how AI needs to be deployed. That is using one of 1,000 calories of AI. And to get the full calorific value out of AI, it needs to be at this infrastructure layer, some level of AI that is coordinating all of the deployments. The manager of AI that's going in and saying, right, you do this, you do this, you do this, you tell him, you tell her, that's how this has to happen. And I think that when that happens, when that understanding kind of comes into play, that actually it's got to come at an institutional level, that's when things will really start to change in the AI deployment landscape.
And obviously, we're not in an age yet where we've reached man versus robot. But what are the concerns that someone might be going through if they were going, right, I've been given this task by my boss to decide whether or not to make this move and to onboard this into the way that our company runs day to day? What might be making them go, hang on a minute, this feels uncomfortable?
I think it's that risk factor, isn't it? It's like, who's responsible for something going wrong? And again, this is why I think it needs to come right at the top. It needs to be, if you've got a holistic platform like Nimbus, where every AI interaction should in theory happen within it, then if a team member or someone within the organization that needs to like deploy something new, some part of AI into their organization, they can build that within Nimbus, and then it is conforming to the same guardrails as the entire organization. So from a CISO's perspective, it's the the golden bullet effectively, where actually now everyone is deploying it in the same way, the same level of control, the same level of governance. No one individually is holding a bit more, a bit less risk. And I think that's what would probably cause someone to pause when they're doing it. It's like, okay, I'm going to do that here, but I really need to expose these pieces of information to it to get it to do that job properly. Can I even do that?
Yeah. Do I want to do that?
And do I want to do that? And do I feel comfortable being the one that introduced that? Maybe not, particularly if it's a large organization where the stakes are very high.
And am I going to get bitten further down the line?
Well, exactly. And the bitten bit actually also is not so much even about data security risk. It's about ROI, right? I have said this thing can do it. I've evaluated it. It's going to cost the business some money. If it doesn't actually deliver against its promise, I've cost the business money. We've wasted time, wasted capital, and I'm responsible for that. So I think that's the other thing, is like, is this thing actually doing what it says on the tin? And I'm not entirely sure. So how do I move forward in that respect?
James, where do you predict enterprise adoption of AI to be going in the next 5 years?
Wow. Okay. Big question.
Needs a big answer.
I would say our vision for that is true organizational sentience. I spoke about it before. This is something that I think will ultimately be where businesses start to operate at the velocity they need to. That one-to-one relationship between market speed and company execution. Ultimately, people are not going to be talking about AI agents. I think AI won't even be mentioned. Like, AI is going to dissolve as a term that's used, because if it's not AI, what is it? So we're speaking about agents now, but ultimately it won't be about agents. It'll be about teams being deployed. So groups of agents that are able to like kind of work together. And then ultimately it's this complete holistic view. And where we will see platforms like Nimbus evolving is that ultimately the back end, the engine that's driving this intelligence, this coordination of agents, the coordination of work being done by AI will disappear. And it'll be this front end that is conversational, is completely reactive to how they want to see things. It's learning from every interaction, every insight that the humans are giving to it. And it becomes like a digital chief strategy officer that is just informing you about what it thinks is the right direction. And the humans in there are just saying, yes, I like this, or no, do this. Becomes almost every interaction from anyone using the platform in the organization just becomes a board decision where they're just saying, yes, no, go forward, don't. And you can see the impact of any of those decisions almost instantaneously. I think that's where this will transition to, and will ultimately be something that really distinguishes businesses that are doing that properly from any of the other businesses on the market.
Let's swing back to the use of the word agents, which we've heard a lot today. Just explain a bit more about what that means. Is that just a personification of AI? Why are we using agent versus AI?
So an agent is effectively a trained part of AI that is able to do a specific function. And that might be conducting a process or a series of processes. Ultimately, it's an embodiment of AI with some constraints and some conditions.
Thank you so much for your time today, James. It's been really great to hear more about AI adoption for enterprises.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for indulging my passion here to talk about where I think AI is going. It's been a pleasure.